The ATF has been in the headlines for decades, usually for reasons that leave gun owners shaking their heads. Agencies are supposed to make communities safer, stop violent criminals, and add real accountability. What we see from the ATF instead is a string of failures, controversies, and abuses that target the wrong people. That pattern explains why the Trump administration's decision to slash their power is such a major shift. The Firearm Owners Protection Act of the 1980s is one of the earliest signs of how badly the ATF lost its way. A congressional study at the time showed that about 75% of ATF cases didn't involve criminals or traffickers at all. They were aimed at regular gun owners and collectors who had made paperwork errors. Imagine buying or selling legally, doing everything above board, and finding yourself investigated like you were part of a cartel just because a form wasn't filled in perfectly. That's not fighting crime. That's bureaucracy punishing ordinary citizens. The shotgun fiasco that followed was more of the same. Certain shotguns were suddenly reclassified, and ATF agents marched into licensed dealers and seized firearms that had already been approved. These were not black market weapons. These were business inventories cleared under federal law. Shops lost thousands of dollars in products lawsuits followed, and the agency walked away without accountability. The message was brutal. Even when you play by the rules, the ATF can change the rules overnight and ruin you. By the mid-2000s, things had not improved. The Richmond gun show scandal in 2005 is a perfect example. People attending a legal event discovered that the ATF was taking pictures of their license plates, collecting names, and keeping tabs on them. These weren't criminals, they were law-abiding citizens exercising their rights. News of the surveillance spread quickly and angered gun owners across the country. If attending a public gun show meant ending up in a government database, how many people would think twice before going to one again? It created a chilling effect that undermined basic freedoms. When you put these stories side by side, a clear pattern emerges. Instead of building trust, the ATF repeatedly eroded it. Every scandal was funded by taxpayer dollars that should have gone toward real public safety. The Firearm Owners Protection Act was supposed to rein in abuse, yet the agency continued down the same road. Catching criminals was hard, catching paperwork mistakes was easy. So the ATF went after easy wins that looked good on paper, but did nothing to make the public safer. All the while, other agencies already existed to fight real crime. Local police, state law enforcement, the FBI, all of them had overlapping roles. That made the ATF look redundant at best and harmful at worst. Communities need effective policing, not another layer of bureaucracy that spends more time harassing collectors than stopping gang members. These early scandals were not small missteps. They set the tone for what came next. By the mid-2000s, the track record of the ATF was so deeply stained that even members of Congress had to acknowledge the agency's problems. The Richmond case wasn't a one-off mistake. It fit into a culture that cared more about numbers and easy cases than genuine results. For the people living through it, the pattern was obvious. The ATF wasn't protecting society, it was policing law-abiding citizens for technicalities. And once an agency shows that kind of systemic failure, it's only a matter of time before serious reforms or serious cuts arrive. That is exactly the point we have reached today. The mid-2000s exposed one of the most infamous failures in ATF history, the so-called Fast and Furious operation. The idea was simple on paper and disastrous in practice. Agents allowed more than 2,000 guns to be purchased by straw buyers connected to cartels hoping to trace the weapons up the chain and catch major traffickers. What happened instead was chaos. The firearms slipped away, tracking was almost non-existent, and many of those guns turned up at crime scenes on both sides of the border. One of them was linked to the murder of a U.S. Border Patrol agent. That single fact should have shut the program down immediately and forced accountability, yet the damage was already done. Instead of stopping crime, the ATF had armed it. Years later, when Congress investigated the picture, only grew uglier. Reports showed failures in record-keeping, failures in oversight, and a shocking willingness to gamble with public safety. Families of victims demanded answers, but the bureaucracy stalled and shifted blame. For gun owners, this scandal was proof that the agency wasn't just inefficient, it was dangerous. How can an organization claim to protect the public when its own strategy puts deadly weapons directly into the hands of criminals? Moving into the early 2010s, the agency launched Operation Fearless, another project that quickly spiraled into embarrassment. Agents rented storefronts pretending to run businesses that would attract criminals. The goal was to intercept illegal sales and straw purchases. Instead, guns were lost. Sensitive documents were abandoned, and at least one fully automatic M4 simply vanished. These were not small mistakes. These were catastrophic blunders that revealed deep flaws in management. Local communities were left wondering how the agency could misplace weapons it was supposed to keep off the streets. When you add to that history the tragedies of Waco and Ruby Ridge, the picture gets even darker. Both events involved deadly standoffs where the ATF's role remains controversial to this day. At Ruby Ridge, a botched operation led to the death of civilians, including a child. At Waco, a raid escalated into a siege that ended with dozens of deaths, many of them women and children. These names still echo whenever people debate federal overreach, and the ATF is permanently tied to them. Critics argue that these disasters were not accidents, but the result of a culture that prioritized aggressive tactics over careful planning. Inside the agency, the problems didn't stop with operations. Whistleblowers revealed schemes where desk employees were classified as law enforcement, allowing them to receive inflated salaries despite never stepping into the field. Over 5 years, that waste added up to at least $5 million, and some say the real number could be far higher. Taxpayers weren't funding crime fighting, they were paying bureaucrats to sit at desks and collect checks bigger than many working Americans ever see. Even more shocking are reports of weapons stolen directly from ATF storage facilities. Millions of dollars worth of firearms simply vanished. For an agency supposedly tasked with regulating guns, losing track of its own inventory is unforgivable. Each missing weapon represents a potential crime, a potential tragedy, and a direct failure of duty. These lapses are not rare mistakes. They form a consistent pattern that stretches back decades. Looking at all of this together, it is hard to escape the conclusion that the ATF is built on weak foundations. Other agencies already handle violent crime. Local police are accountable to their communities and their chiefs. The ATF, on the other hand, answers to bureaucrats that no voter ever chose. That lack of accountability makes every scandal worse because there is no direct path for citizens to demand change. Instead, the cycle repeats wasted money, lost weapons, harassment of law-abiding owners, and operations that put innocent lives at risk. The truth is that these stories are not random missteps. They show a culture that rewards shortcuts, prioritizes statistics over safety, and punishes the very people it claims to protect. When critics call the ATF redundant, they are not exaggerating. The track record proves it. An agency that repeatedly arms criminals loses control of its own inventory and targets collectors for paperwork errors cannot honestly claim to be essential. It has become a burden, and the longer it exists in this form, the more damage it does to the trust between government and citizens. The years of scandals, wasted dollars, and failed operations built the case for change. But what we are witnessing now is not just another oversight hearing or a slap on the wrist. The Trump administration has taken a step that cuts straight to the heart of the agency. In the proposed 2026 budget, the ATF is facing a massive reduction, almost 30% of its funding gone. That translates to a workforce cut from more than 5,000 down to around 3,600. For an agency that was once dreaming of expanding to 10 or even 12,000 employees, this is a collapse in scale. The numbers alone are staggering, but the meaning behind them is even more powerful. Cutting nearly a third of the ATF's staff means fewer agents available to harass lawful owners over paperwork, fewer resources for sting operations that end up losing guns, and fewer bureaucrats designing new regulatory headaches like pistol brace restrictions or trigger bans. Hundreds of millions of dollars will stay in taxpayers' pockets instead of funding another failed mission. One detail worth highlighting is that more than 500 industry operations investigators are on the chopping block. These are the employees who descend on gun shops, poring over records, hunting for minor clerical errors, and shutting down businesses that have otherwise followed the law. Removing that layer of intimidation is a win not just for shop owners, but for the entire community of lawful buyers and sellers. People who want to comply with the rules shouldn't live in fear of losing their livelihood because a digit was misplaced on a form. At the same time, there is serious talk about merging the ATF into the DEA. That possibility speaks volumes. It means even inside Washington, leaders are recognizing the redundancy. Why keep a separate agency limping along with a track record of abuse when another agency could absorb its responsibilities? Streamlining would cut overlap, reduce waste, and make it harder for bureaucrats to hide their failures. The shakeup has not stopped at budgets and mergers. Leadership changes have hit the agency hard. Longtime officials have been pushed out, and new names are stepping in. That alone is proof that the status quo was unacceptable. Add to that the mandate given to the new Office of Government Efficiency to slash more than 50 existing ATF regulations, and the picture is clear. This is not tinkering around the edges. This is a dismantling of authority that had been abused for far too long. For gun owners, the practical effects will be felt almost immediately. With fewer agents, there will be less time for the ATF to sit outside gun shows photographing license plates. With fewer investigators, there will be less harassment of local shops over harmless mistakes. With fewer bureaucrats writing rules, there will be fewer sudden bans on accessories that millions of Americans already own. The playing field finally begins to tilt back toward fairness. Critics will say that cutting the ATF undermines safety. That argument doesn't hold up when you look at the record. The ATF has repeatedly armed criminals through botched operations, lost weapons from its own warehouses, and spent more effort on targeting collectors than stopping gangs. Real public safety comes from local police who know their communities, from state agencies directly accountable to elected leaders, and from federal organizations like the FBI that actually focus on criminal networks. The ATF has never been indispensable. It has been redundant, and now the system is recognizing that. The bottom line is that fewer armed bureaucrats with the power to strip away constitutional rights is always a good thing. Every cut reduces the chances of another Fast and Furious, another Operation Fearless, another scandal that erodes trust. Every dollar not wasted on inflated salaries or abandoned storefronts is a dollar that can stay with families who earned it. For decades, the ATF has proven that it cannot be trusted to use its authority responsibly. This moment marks a turning point. The agency that once seemed untouchable is finally being forced to shrink to justify its existence and to face the possibility that its days as an independent force are numbered. That is a victory for accountability, a victory for taxpayers, and above all, a victory for the Second Amendment community that has carried the burden of ATF abuse for far too long.